Hello. Been a while. I reread a few books. I'm sure you saw the thumbnail. You know. I reread a few books recently, and I wanted to talk about them. Two books that I have read before in my life around the same time. I read both of them around the same time, um, which was college during college. Um, and they are about sort of similar things. They have similar topics. And those two books are the classic first novel. They're both first novels, and they're both by men who have published three novels. Um, though one person is publishing a lot more quickly than the other. So the first one is Jeffrey Eugenides' The Virgin Suicides from 1993, I believe. And then the other book is Wolf in White Van by John Darnielle, leader of the Mountain Goats. That one came out in 2014, I believe. So I read Virgin Suicides. I would imagine it was 2013 or 14 when I read it. I'm almost certain I was working at Barnes and Noble at the time that I read it. And then I would have read Wolf in White Van about a year later, right before I finished college, 2015, early 2015. Now, my enduring memory, the legacy of these books in my mind was that when I read Virgin Suicides, I thought it was just sort of earth shattering. It was one of my favorite things I'd ever read. I just was totally enamored with it. And then Wolf and White Van, I thought was good, but it didn't shatter the earth for me, you know. But it kind of lingered. It lingered, and it itched at the back of my mind like a skin tag or a lesion for all these years, whispering to me, saying that there's more for me there. And I went back to it and I reread it, listened to the audiobook actually. Highly recommend the audiobook of Wolf and White Van. John reads it himself, and then there is also music that he made for it. It's sort of like dark ambient guitar music that kind of comes in as like stingers for emotional effect. It's very cool. Um, so I listened to it, and then I listened to Virgin Suicides too. And my TLDR is that I feel like my opinion on these two books has reversed with, nearly 10 years of time between when I read them. They are both books that deal with suicide in a lot of ways. Virgin Suicide's very obviously in the title, even. And then Wolf and White Van is the narrator of that book is a suicide survivor. So, I'm going to talk about them one at a time, and then I think I'm going to compare and contrast them a little bit after I talk about them individually. So first I'm going to talk about Virgin Suicides, even though I read it more recently. So Virgin Suicides is a book that is written in the first person plural. So it is narrated by a an unnamed group of boys, group of men who were boys. They are now in their 30s, looking back 20 years to their adolescence in the 1970s in suburban Detroit, when over the course of 1 year, all five sisters, all of the daughters of the Lisbon family, committed suicide. And these boys were very enamored with these girls and wanted very much to save them and failed. And they seem to be plagued very deeply by this failure. They want to understand. They want to understand why this happened. They want to determine if this was preventable. They want to decide if they are responsible. At the time that I read this book, I was not super jazzed about being alive. And one of the major ways that I was kind of interrogating myself about this was a somewhat similar situation. I had a friend when I was in middle school and early high school, before I went to art school, when I was still in public school, who we were not, like best friends. We were not like super close, but we were casual friends. We hung out sometimes in groups. This was the era of like Halo LAN parties and things like that, so we would, be at those types of events together. And we were definitely like chums in class. There were multiple times that I had gym with him. And, I'm the fat kid. He was like the anemic, scrawny, tiny nerd type. So we sort of teamed up to try to not have to do gym together. And then in high school, after I left, he worked at Micro Center. So he was a nerd. He was a computer guy. And so I would see him, when I went into Micro Center and stuff. But we never hung out again after I left my public school when I was 16. And then, about a year after we graduated from high school, he shot himself. And I had, not talked to him or seen him in a while at that point. And I didn't really talk to anybody who did talk to him anymore, or who knew him or who was close to him at all. I got a message on Facebook from a person who I used to be friends with and very deeply dislike, and at that time had already reached that point with this person who texted me or messaged me, because she had, not super long before that, had her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend die in a car crash, who I also knew but was not friends with. So she messaged me about this friend. I think I can say his first name for simplicity. His name was Dan. And so she was like, "Hey, I just heard about Dan. I'm so sorry. I know how hard it is. I know you guys were close, and I know how hard it is to lose people because I just lost, my ex-boyfriend." And I was just like, Dan's dead? I didn't know. And so then I started digging, found out that he had died. And found out, like, oh, well, you should talk to this person who we were in school with, because he's friends with Dan. His sister is friends with Dan's sister, so he knows what's going on. He knows, funeral plans and things like that. So I got in touch and talked about it. And went to the funeral. It was I remember it was pouring rain. I was working at Jimmy John's at the time. It was on Dollar Sub Day, which is the busiest day of the year. I had to go and ask for the morning off, and my boss almost didn't let me go, and I was like, please. I had to be like, look, my friend committed suicide and I want to go to his funeral. It's kind of hard to say no to that, I think. But so I had to go do that in the morning and then go immediately from there to Jimmy John's, like in a suit, and then change into my Jimmy John's uniform in the bathroom. But the point being that I was very disturbed by this because I was unexpected. It was truly, truly unexpected. I think that there are definitely a lot of people in my life that I love and have loved who, if they committed suicide, I would not be surprised. I would, of course, be sad, but I would not be surprised, you know? I was surprised by Dan. It was not in the cards, I didn't think. I didn't know that he was suffering in that way. And I felt a lot of guilt. I felt like he needed people, and I could have been one of those people, and I wasn't, and I didn't do that. And I was like, I left. I went to art school, and then I kind of forgot all about him. How many other people did something like that? How many people just kind of let him drift away. And so over the ensuing years, especially once I got to college and I started really struggling a lot with my own ideation, I started getting a little obsessive about it. Dan had no real internet presence in a traditional sense. He didn't have Facebook, MySpace, in that era, any of that at all. And he was a a computer guy, so he knew, he was kind of a big privacy head, and so he didn't want to be, data harvested and whatnot. But I started doing, some internet sleuthing. And what I ended up doing was I ended up finding his Steam account. And then through his Steam account, I found his clan, his gaming clan that he was in. He played a lot of Age of Empires and Lord of the Rings Online and World of Warcraft. And I found the clan he was in, and I found their forum. And on the forum, I found 2 threads. The first thread was made by his cousin, and it was to tell the people of his clan that he had committed suicide. Basically being like, hey, I know that Dan really cared about all of you a lot, and so I wanted to let you know what happened. He had been, he was going to school in St. Cloud, which is an hour and a half, 15 minutes away from the cities. He'd come home for the weekend to visit, and at some point after midnight, he sat in his computer chair and put a blanket over his head and then took a rifle and shot himself through the roof of his mouth. And nobody knows where he got the rifle from. Nobody knows, anything else other than that. And that really fucked me up when I found that out, where it's like he was such a small guy, he was so frail, he was so just not a man who you would think would meet a violent end. And I was very haunted by this image that I constructed in my mind of his death. The other thing I found was a thing that they did where they had a tournament of Age of Empires, which was his favorite game, Age of Empires 2, in his honor, dedicated to his memory. And I believe that they donated there was a fundraiser, and then they raised money and they donated it to an animal shelter because he was a big dog person. But I spent years just Googling his screen name and his name, and just, trying to find any pieces of him. There's like on his internet obituary, there's like 2 pictures of him. And they're like the only 2 pictures in the universe that I have of him, other than school photos in the yearbook. It's all I have left of this person who used to be alive. So I understand the plight, the desire of the narrators of the Virgin Suicides. Very strongly, I understand. But that was a while ago for me, that I was doing that, struggling in that way, reckoning with Dan's death, and when I read Virgin Suicides for the first time. And when I reread Virgin Suicides, I was thinking about how the book is sort of asking, can we understand why these girls did this? But then it kind of moves out a layer and it asks us, can we understand women? Can men understand women? But then it kind of moves out even one layer further, and it just is like, can we understand anyone else other than ourselves? Can we ever truly know a person, or is, it just solipsism? I don't find that question to be particularly intriguing anymore. Because I feel like the answer is yes. I do think that Eugenides displays this sort of weird biological determinism about sex in his books. This and Middlesex, and the marriage plot too. They all have a lot of themes about gender roles and gender norms, and there is this sentiment that I get from him that is just sort of like, women are like this, men are like this, and then in Middlesex, the people who are, not one or the other, they're just sort of like not, what are they? They're an unknown. I don't know. It's a weird vibe. I'm not pointing a finger or anything. It strikes me like that is the vibe I get. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that there is any sort of biological determinism in sex or anything like that, not even remotely, at all. So, and I don't think that it is impossible for me to understand women. I would say that there is a lot of things about the lived experience of women that I can only truly sympathize with because I don't, I've never experienced them, so it's inconceivable to me. That, yes, I would agree with that. But I think that there can be empathy and understanding. And I think that you can understand how people work, why people do the things that they do. I don't think that women are arcane, I think that it is a weird old person kind of mentality to see it that way. And that turned me off on rereading Virgin Suicides. Now, all of that being said, let's talk about Wolf and White Van. Wolf and White Van is about a guy named Sean who is in his, maybe late 30s, early 40s probably. Late 30s, I think. He has had two really bad things happen to him in his life. One really bad thing happened to him pretty recently, and then a different really bad thing happened to him a long time ago, in the sense of when the book is taking place. And then basically the book is working backwards through his life, going from now back to the really bad thing that happened a long time ago. Cataloging his trauma and his recovery. And you figure out pretty early on what the really bad thing that happened a long time ago was, but he dances around it. It's never explicit. He spends the whole book sort of pirouetting around a declarative statement of what happened. So it's not much of a spoiler for me to say that he shoots himself, much the same way my friend Dan did. And the thing that happened more recently is a little more complicated. In the time after he attempts suicide, he is very severely disfigured and disabled by his suicide attempt. And it makes it so that he can't really have a normal job, a traditional job. And so he starts designing games that are role-playing games that you play through the mail. He tells you where you are and gives you some options, and then you write back and you say what you do, and then you just play that way. And he has a bunch of them that he has designed, but the first one he made is the one that's really popular. It's called The Trace Italian. It's like a post-apocalyptic kind of survival horror, fantastical a little bit kind of thing. And recently there was a young couple, a boy and a girl, who were teenagers, who got a little too enamored with the world of the Trace Italian. There is some delusion that was happening. There was some losing of the border between reality and fantasy. They believed that if they went out to these cornfields in Kansas, where in the game world, this thing, the Trace Italian, which is this sort of big building that's the goal to get to in the game, much like the Dark Tower and the Stephen King books, they thought that they could go to Kansas and find this place in the real world, and that is not true. What they did instead was that they got hypothermia out in the fields overnight, and the girl dies. And then her family sues Sean, the narrator, for wrongful death, for inspiring her death. We have to work backwards through that, and then we go back further. We see his recovery through his trauma, and then we see how the people around him tried to reckon with the decision that he made when he was very young, like she was. And one of the big ways that they did this is his parents, his family, people wanted to blame rock and roll music. They wanted to say that Satan was, influencing children. This is at the time that this happened. It's the 80s. So Satanic Panic is happening. The title of the book comes from a passage where he's watching televangelists talk about backmasked messages in rock music, and one of them that they're talking about is that the secret message in the rock music is a person saying wolf in white van, which is, according to them, like an allusion to the devil preying upon children. But they also, they want to blame people in his life. They want to blame his, girlfriend. They want to act like it was her idea, that they were in some sort of suicide pact, all these things. They just, they are incapable of accepting that he made this decision for himself, even if it was the wrong decision. I think that when I read Wolf in White Van, I was too close. I was too close to all of that, and I couldn't see clearly what was happening in that book. I didn't have the perspective yet. I didn't have the skills yet. I didn't have the wisdom yet to really understand. It went over my head. I understood that it was good, and I understood that it had had some sort of impact on me, but I didn't really understand until I reread it, and I was able to see all of the ways that it had impacted me. And this book is truly devastating. It, I think, is the most accurate, realistic depiction of these things that I've read. And by these things, I mean suicidal ideation. But more than that, it is about living with trauma and living with regret and shame and living with your decisions. There is so much empathy in this book for people who struggle in this way. And the thing is that it's like written from this perspective where we're very far away from that moment, the moment where he made this decision that completely changed the trajectory of his life forever. He has a lot of perspective, and it frames it in this way where it's almost like he is not that person anymore. He did succeed in killing himself, in the sense that the person he was before he shot himself is not the person that he is anymore, and it could never be. But he also has this incredible amount of empathy for that person that he used to be. There's one part in it where he says that he feels an incredible amount of guilt. He puts up with a lot from his dad. He feels a lot of guilt towards his dad because, as he says, a long time ago I did something very terrible to his son. And, oh God, I'm getting choked up. I'm sorry. There's another part that really hit me hard, where he is talking to his nurse about the two kids, and he is describing them talking about what happened to his nurse. And he says somewhat flippantly that the boy was kind of dumb, or that he did a dumb thing. And then he kind of corrects himself to say that, that dumbness is not bad. It is not a negative thing. And then the quote that he says is, "And I felt a ravenous grief for nice boys who are too stupid to take care of themselves and too dumb to remember to check the surrounding brush for snakes before settling down to sleep for the night." And that broke me. That just, because that is where I am now in my life. I look at myself 20 years ago, I look at myself 10 years ago, I look at myself 5 years ago. And I see a stupid boy who doesn't know how to take care of himself. And I feel a ravenous grief for that stupid boy. So, in the end, I went to my favorites shelf on Goodreads, and I took the Virgin Suicides off, and I put Wolf and White Van upon. Virgin Suicides is still a fantastic book. It is still extremely well written. It is worth your time. It's immaculately written. Eugenides is an incredible prose stylist. And I will read whatever he writes next. I think we're about due for a new one from him. It's been about 10 years. But it didn't sing a harmony in my soul this time. But Wolf and White Van did. Big time. Big time. Major big time. So yeah, that was a very positive experience, even though it was hard. Not a fun book. I will say, if you are interested in reading these books, I haven't talked a ton about, the contents of them. I mostly was just I'm talking about myself and my own life, right? But, the only way that we understand art is through our relationship with it, how we see ourselves through other people's eyes. We see ourselves in these characters, in these stories. And so, I don't think there is any real purpose or benefit to talking about art unless we are using it to talk about ourselves. Because if you wanted to know what these books were about, you could read Wikipedia. And if you wanted to know if they were good or if people thought they were good, you could go on Goodreads and you could look at what their score is. that is not why we watch BookTube or, follow critics or whatever. We want human connection and understanding. We want to understand each other, and we want to understand ourselves. We always strive to do this whether we're aware of it or not. And I think that other than, interpersonal relationships with people, the other main way that we do this, we achieve this, is through making and consuming art, through seeing, experiencing art, and making it for ourselves. That's how we understand ourselves and each other. And so, I can make this video and say, yeah, I'm going to talk about these two books, but I'm really talking about myself. And I think that if you're not doing that, then why are you doing this? So yeah, I recommend both of these. My personal preferences for the Darnielle book. I am seeing him perform. The Mountain Goats are going to be here in less than 3 weeks, on the 20th of May. I'm hoping that he'll be around. If I can find him, I'm going to try and get him to sign my Mountain Goat. He's a Magic player. I also picked up his new book, Devil House, which came out in January. I haven't read it yet, but I will soon. I would like to. I just listened to this audiobook because I was able to get it from the library. I shot another video that I'm not putting out, because Jim at Jim's Books Reading and stuff, he made a thing about making your own city tag. I shot footage for one, and then I didn't like it. I did not like it, and so I threw it away, and I'm gonna redo it. I'm gonna redo the tag completely, because I decided that it was, the way that I approached it was boring and not fun, and I didn't like it, so we're tossing it out. And then, so I'm going to work on that. I'm going to do that. And then I also have another book review that I am going to do when I have the gumption for it for this, because I read this. And, yes. I will say yes, yes, yes. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much for putting up with me. And my sporadicness and not posting anything for a really long time. Thank you for sticking around. If you're new here, thank you for giving me a shot. I have 7 days left until I start full-time work for the first time in a very long time again, so I don't think that is going to be a positive influence on me posting regularly, but we will see. Maybe I will need this as some sort of outlet after I get home. So yeah. Have a good night.